Hi there folks, welcome to the Minute to Midnight Show. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. Just another week or so and I'll be heading to the US to be in Pennsylvania. But I've got this show today and with me I'm really looking forward to having you back, Alex Newman. It's been a while, longer than normal since we last talked.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much, Tony, and looking forward to having you back in the United States again. So Praise the Lord.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it. I don't like the travelling side of it, but it's nice when I get there and settle again. But yeah. So, gosh, I suppose the big news today is Pope Francis's death, which we've talked a lot in the past about his globalist ideals and things. So it will be interesting to see what happens now.
Yeah, and Pope Francis really was an unprecedented pope in a lot of ways. The left-wing extremism and even the globalism. I mean, there have been globalist-minded popes in the past, but the globalism of this pope was beyond anything we had ever seen before. The support for what he himself called humanism, which I have always seen as an anti-Christian idea. And in fact, if you go back to the roots of it, it is absolutely anti-Christian. Pope talked about setting up a new humanist education system at the international level. And it's not even controversial among Catholics to say that his papacy was far from the norm, certainly alienated a huge number of conservative Catholics in the U.S. And one of the things that I have had my eyes on with Pope Francis since the very beginning, we did an article at the New American, one of my colleagues, actually, William Jasper, who himself is a Catholic, although more traditional-minded than kind of some of the more new stuff post-Vatican II. But he did a really interesting piece exposing what appears to have been a conspiracy involving Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and George Soros to oust the previous pope and bring in this current pope, this Jesuit pope from Latin America, who, of course, had a long history of support for liberation theology and some of these other movements that had previously been condemned. So I don't think we're getting the full story about what's going on in the Vatican. Pope Francis was really a revolutionary, even from the Catholic perspective. If you look at the documents he put out, if you look at the positions he staked out on environmentalism, the ecumenism, where he talked publicly, for the first time that I'm aware of ever in Catholic Church history, he described other religions as also paths to God. And he wasn't just talking about, orthodoxy or evangelicalism or Protestantism. He was talking about paganism.
Yeah.
So this is a very strange chapter in Catholic history coming to a close. It'll be very interesting to see what happens next. My understanding is that the expectation, at least among Catholics, based on the current makeup of the College of Cardinals, is that we could see a slight move back toward conservatism. But really huge things happening in the Catholic Church that concern all of us, whether we share belief in the infallibility of the Pope and the idea that he's the vicar of Christ or not.
Yes, it'd be interesting to see if another Jesuit gets into his shoes.
Yeah,
the
Jesuit movement, it doesn't get talked about a lot, but the Jesuit movement is unbelievably significant. It's been behind the scenes largely for hundreds of years, but very, very active in the history of Europe. I don't think you can really understand the history of Europe and even the history of the world without understanding the role of the Jesuits, going all the way back to Ignatius Loyola. I mean, this was a very, very important faction within the Catholic hierarchy. And, with Pope Francis, they emerged triumphant over the whole kit and caboodle, to use a common American expression. And the implications of that for Catholics, very, very profound. And Tony, I've shared this with you before. I actually come from a Catholic family. We grew up as kind of lax Catholics, Christmas, Easter, etc. But even among my family, a lot of concern about the direction that Pope Francis was leading the Catholic Church. I interviewed a Catholic priest who told me on camera that he thought the Pope was teaching doctrines of demons, which I thought was very interesting. He was defrocked not too long after that. Along with Archbishop Vigano, who was talking about the Pope's support for what he described as the Luciferian one world order. So really, really significant, the emergence of a Jesuit Pope, and be interesting to see if we get another one.
It will, because obviously they were outlawed originally, the Jesuits, but then they've gone from being outlawed by the Catholic Church to being the driving force, it would seem. So it will be really interesting to see what direction it takes once, they find the next one. So, yeah, for sure. So talking about globalism, now what's the story with Klaus Schwab with the World Economic Forum?
Well, he's officially being wheeled off stage left, and he stepped down last year as executive chairman, and now he's resigning his position on the board of trustees. And I think a lot of people are taking this as a sign that globalism is in retreat. And I think as far as the public is concerned, yes, globalism has never been as politically and culturally toxic as it is today. And I think Klaus Schwab is partly responsible for that. The guy was almost a caricature of some kind of evil supervillain trying to take over the world. And I think a lot of people looked at that and thought, wow, if he's the leader of the globalists, I want no part of that. So I think they realized that from an optics perspective, that was very, very dangerous. But I don't think it means what a lot of people think it means. I don't think it means that the globalists are in retreat or that they're, back to the drawing board. At best, you might say we're witnessing here the old-time Marxist strategy for 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Right? You push way past the limit. When the pressure gets too big, you say, oh, yeah, we'll just take a step back real quick. But they've still made massive gains. And I think if you look at the strategy that the globalists are pursuing, they know they're in a new era right now with the presidency of Donald Trump. They know they can't just come out and be as bold as they have been in the past with globalist proclamations. But if you read Klaus Schwab's book on the Great Reset, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, very, very significant book, he talked about something even then in 2020. Globalization, he said there was a backlash against globalization during the height of COVID hysteria for good reason. And so he proposes what he describes as an in-between solution. Right? And solution, well, what's the problem that we need globalism for as a solution? So the in-between solution, he said, was regionalization. And we are watching that marching onwards at full speed all over the world, right? It's happening in your area of the world with the Pacific Islands, Asia Pacific Forum. It's happening with the SARC. It's happening with the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement. It's happening with the African Union. The European Union is, of course, getting deeper and stronger in response to Russia. Putin is using the Europeans and Ukraine as a pretext to deepen the Eurasian Union he's building. So CELAC, of course, just had a major meeting. This is the community of Caribbean and Latin American states, which seems to be the kind of premier globalist regional grouping right now that UNASUR and UNASUR has fallen out of favor. So this agenda, this globalism, is still marching forward. And even at the international front, it's really interesting, hasn't gotten a lot of attention, Tony, but the first ever UN tax on humanity took a huge leap forward just last week. They came together and they agreed on the first ever global tax. It's a carbon tax on international shipping, which of course will affect the folks in New Zealand, will affect the folks in the United States. And to the extent that there's been much public discussion on this in the United States, it's been like, well, Americans are going to get ripped off and we're going to pay more taxes than our fair share. And I'm encouraging people to recognize this is much bigger than just who's going to pay the tax. This is the first ever UN tax on humanity. Historically, they've had to depend on basically gifts and donations from member states. And yeah, they have assessed contributions. But if we're honest, I mean, no government is going to be forced at the barrel of a gun to hand over tax money. Under this new system, and yeah, it's small, it's $100 billion a year is what they expect to raise. For New Zealand, that's a lot compared to the U.S. federal budget. It's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. But folks, recognize what this represents. It represents the camel's nose under the tent, represents the first ever global tax imposed directly on humanity. And if they can tax CO2 emissions from ships, which, as they say, make up 3% of global emissions, what do you think they can do to aviation, to agriculture, to energy production, transportation? So this is unbelievably dangerous. And by the way, the Trump administration resisted this. They circulated a document that ended up leaked saying that you better not do this, that we're going to retaliate, we're going to impose reciprocal measures if the International Maritime Organization moves forward with it, and they moved forward with it anyway. So very, very interesting that this is happening and that nobody's talking about it, Tony.
No, to be honest, I hadn't even heard of that. But I mean, as New Zealand, because we're so far from everywhere else, things have to be shipped a long distance, and we already pay a premium on shipped goods. So thinking if that adds even more cost to the cost of shipping, that's not really very good aside from anything else.
Yeah. It's going to be devastating and the UN kind of admits this, right? They say that this is really going to hurt certain countries much worse than others. Talks about island nations, least developed countries that depend on shipping, especially those that import or export a lot of food. A lot of these people, they're barely surviving, right? It's not like they have the luxury of just paying more taxes. And so, quite ironically, one of the things they're proposing to do with the tax money is to compensate the nations that are going to be most harmed by this tax. So they're going to get a whole bunch of countries, a whole bunch of people dependent on this. I've got a very big article about this at the New American. People can find part of it is online right now at thenewamerican.com. We've got one coming out in the next issue of the print magazine as well. But really, there's been so little attention to this. And I think people need to stop thinking about, who's going to pay most of the tax, which admittedly is an important thing, and recognize the really important thing is this is really the emergence of a global government. Once they have direct access to our money, they can fund police. They've already got all kinds of law enforcement programs. They can fund more armies. They've got the UN peacekeeping programs that have troops deployed all over the world right now. They can fund more power for their court. And of course, they just arrested recently the former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. And I don't care what people think about him. The only reason he came on my radar before is because he was saying we should destroy the UN and the Philippines should leave the UN. Interesting that he now has been arrested. Of course, the ICC is also trying to round up Bibi Netanyahu, the leader of Israel. And of course, if they can round up Bibi Netanyahu, who, by the way, the state of Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court, they could certainly say that they want to arrest Trump as well. So, folks, what we're watching now, even while people are talking about globalism being in retreat, is a massive advance for globalism on multiple fronts that just aren't getting the attention that the normal globalist silliness does.
Yeah, and I guess the various taxes, the carbon taxes and things, they are nasty. And a country like New Zealand, it does affect us. I mean, we are an agricultural-based country and we do export a lot of food and we import pretty much a lot of other stuff. So any of these types of things have got to impact us. So
it will. It will hard. And it'll also provide endless revenue for the UN. Again, the UN says 3% of global emissions comes from shipping, and they're going to tax shipping to stop those emissions. And they agreed to this, by the way. They agreed. They've got a final vote coming up in October, and they expect to start collecting these taxes starting in 2027. So this is happening now. It's not like some hypothetical future threat. It's happening now. And once they can justify that, once they've established a precedent of taxing the shipping, it'll just be a very simple matter to say, well, hey, we're already taxing your shipping to save humanity and Mother Earth from the evils of carbon dioxide. What about your sheep farms, New Zealanders?
Yep.
What about your cow ranches, Americans? What about your air travel, you wealthy Westerners? And they will not stop at shipping. You can take it to the bank.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so what about this move into digitalization of our IDs and things? And how do you see the real ID situation now coming into that?
The real ID is a major threat, Tony, and I've been exposing this since they adopted it. Basically, I mean, they adopted it in 2005. Nobody paid any attention to it, but almost my entire journalistic career, I've been sounding the alarm about this because what it does, and I think for the folks in New Zealand, this probably won't resonate as much, but in America, we've never had a federal ID. I mean, a passport. When passports got implemented. But we have never had any kind of federal identification system. We've never had federal ID databases like this. So this is an unprecedented intrusion into our state sovereignty. It's also an unconstitutional intrusion. The powers of Congress are outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. They can run a post office. They can have a Navy. They can have protections for intellectual property. There's a list of things that they can do. And then right in the 10th Amendment, it explicitly says any powers not delegated to the federal government are either reserved for the states or for the people. In other words, if we didn't give you that power when we created you, federal government, you don't have that power. And yet they're now moving full speed ahead on enforcement. They're saying that by next month, everybody's going to need it to fly. It's not exactly true. They're going to do what they call rolling enforcement. So they'll give you some warnings and stuff. And you can get on a plane without it, but it becomes much more difficult. You need various other documents. And I think the people who are pushing this at the moment are largely well-intended. These are people who are concerned about illegal immigration. These are people who are concerned about the open borders that we've had for the last few years. But in fact, I think I said this on your show before the new administration took over. One of the biggest priorities for globalists over the next 4 years is going to be to try to bring in a national digital identification system. And the pretexts are going to be illegal immigration and voter fraud, because they know those are two issues that resonate with conservatives. So we're watching this now. I know Kristi Noem at Homeland Security, who made the announcement, is getting a lot of pushback on this. We've got states, including Democrat states, saying we are not going to participate. We are not going to cooperate. We've had many states specifically pass laws saying they will not cooperate with this. And I think that is something that we need more of in this country, more action by state governments resisting unconstitutional usurpations of power. But I would caution people, this is not just some minor inconvenience to improve the safety of air travel. As far as I know, there's never been a terrorist or somebody, some evildoer nabbed trying to do something evil on an airplane because he was using a fake ID. So this is really a non-issue. What it really does, though, is lays the groundwork for a digital ID, which, of course, paves the way for the digital currency and the digital gulag that they're trying to build. In fact, you can't have the digital currencies and the digital gulag without the digital ID component. So I'm very, very concerned about this, Tony, and a lot of very important organizations are urging Americans not to comply, not to participate. But we'll have to keep our eyes on it, because it is, unfortunately, right now moving ahead.
So people need to know they can use an international passport, and to fly and so on anyway. Like some people don't think, they think, oh, you have to have the real ID or that's it. But no, there are other things. But aside from airline travel, what else does the real ID impact in America? Does it, it can't be just air travel, it must be other things.
There are a few other things. It's mostly things that don't really apply to everyday Americans, right? Not a lot of Americans are going to go into a federally regulated nuclear power plant or facility. So, most of the leverage that they have with the general public is with air travel, because a lot of the other things are things that aren't going to apply to most Americans anyway. But, I think for foreigners listening, they think, oh, well, you could just use a passport. That's no big deal. I should add here that there are a lot of Americans who don't have a passport and who have never left the country. America's not like Europe, where it's just a very normal thing to just pick up and go to another country. There are a lot of Americans who never leave the United States, never think much about abroad. And so there are a lot of Americans who don't have a passport. And so I think they're hoping that this is going to be the leverage that they need to get all the states on board to finally start giving everybody real IDs. So,
yes. Okay. So, I guess people that are in America, I do get people sending me stuff about this and that. Like if somebody was wanting to fly now, and because I think the deadline is the 7th of May, what would you suggest to Americans now that are trying to look to fly in the next few weeks?
If you don't have a real ID, I think you're going to want to keep following the news reports. My guess is they're going to back down on this. They have backed down already at least a dozen times that I can think of, where they said, we're going to start enforcement. And then, there were still 20 states that wouldn't issue real IDs. And, okay, just kidding. We're going to push it back another 2 years. And they keep doing this game of chicken. My guess is we'll see something like that again. No guarantees, of course. So I would stay tuned to the news. As I understand it right now, what they're talking about with this progressive enforcement is it's going to be kind of stepped up enforcement over a 2-year period. And so I understand right now you can still travel and you're going to get a warning starting on the date that they claim they're going to start really enforcing this. You're still allowed to travel, but you're going to get a warning. And then I guess the next time you travel, you're expected to show up with a real ID or some other compliant tool. But I would urge people to check out where a lot of Americans have a real ID and don't even realize it, Tony. My state of Florida, I'm embarrassed to admit, won't give you anything other than a real ID. There are some states that will give you either a real ID or a traditional state and my real ID, which I have to have one in Florida to be able to drive, looks just like any other Florida driver's license would have before the real ID came in, but it's got a little yellow star on it. I wish I was kidding. I'm not. I don't know who thought that would be a good idea. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a lot of states still that have been issuing these for a long time. There's a lot of states that said, no, we're not going to participate. And then there are states like California where you can choose, do you want a real ID or a traditional state ID? And so you need to find out where you're at as an individual. Do you have a real ID already? And if not, then, what's this going to look like? What's this enforcement going to look like? Do I have any other alternatives to fly? And, I would definitely check it out, though, before going to the airport after May 7th.
Okay. So what else do you see as important to discuss today? Have you got any other, areas?
Well, there's a lot going on here at the state level, Tony, that I think is very encouraging. And I've said this for a long time. It's almost more important what's happening at the state level than at the federal level. Your state government affects your life far more on a day-to-day basis than the federal government does. The state government really has all residual powers that weren't surrendered to the federal government. And so there's been some huge news stories just in the last couple of weeks. One of the big ones, I've got a big article, investigative piece that I've been working on for a year coming out, and that is on transactional gold. The first state last week, Arkansas, not just passed the bill overwhelmingly, by the way, but it got signed into law by Governor Sarah Sanders Huckabee, creating the first ever in any one of the 50 states transactional gold currency. So this is a huge development. State of Texas is working on this. Utah actually passed it overwhelmingly as well, but it was vetoed by the governor. I'm told by the lawmakers who worked on this that they're preparing a veto override to bypass the governor's veto. And so what this means, and there are variations in each of the states. There are about 25 states considering these right now. What it means is a citizen would be able to do his or her commerce, his or her business with gold or silver. So take, for example, the Utah system or the Texas system or even the Arkansas system. What happens here is you're issued a debit card, a debit style card, where it's attached to your gold or your silver account. And so Texas, in 2015, created a gold bullion depository where you as a citizen could store your gold there, and they would protect it. Under this system, you'll get a debit card, and you can go to the store and purchase whatever you want using your gold. Now, the merchant will get paid in Federal Reserve notes if he or she wants Federal Reserve notes, and you will pay in gold. And so an instant transaction happens. The gold is sold. It's turned into dollars. The merchant gets dollars. And so there's a number of reasons why they're doing this, and there's a number of reasons why this is so significant. But I think the most important thing, as far as an everyday person is concerned, is your dollar is losing its value very, very rapidly. And it's not just some like weird, mysterious force that nobody understands. When they talk about inflation, I think the best way to understand that is it's a tax, or you might even call it theft, right? If you have worked your whole life to save $100,000, and then the Federal Reserve System, which is a privately owned cartel of banks, decides to double the money supply tomorrow, that $100,000 you saved, they just stole half of the purchasing power of that money. All they had to do was type in a few numbers into a computer. Now, if you were storing that in the gold bullion depository in Texas, it wouldn't matter because it'd be stored in gold, and so the value of your gold would increase accordingly, or at least the value in terms of Federal Reserve notes. If you're storing it in Federal Reserve notes in your safe, you just lost half of your purchasing power, or more accurately, they just took half of your purchasing power. So this is an effort by the states to resist this stuff. Another big thing that just happened again in Arkansas. Kudos to Arkansas. They just overwhelmingly passed a law, and it was signed into law last week by the governor, mandating that every classroom in the state and every government building have a big placard of the 10 Commandments, as along with the national motto of the United States. Now, I will start off by saying I still don't think it's a good idea to send your children into a government school, right? Just because the 10 Commandments are there doesn't mean that they're going to be getting a real education, doesn't mean that they're going to be taught to read properly. It doesn't even mean that they're going to be taught respect for God or God's laws or God's moral principles, okay? Just to be clear. But I think it's a really, really good example of some of the resistance that we're seeing to this tyranny that has been coming down on us. It was back in the 60s that the U.S. Supreme Court said we couldn't have prayer and we couldn't have Bibles in school. It was in the 80s that the Supreme Court said we couldn't have the 10 Commandments in school. And frankly, who made the Supreme Court judge of the universe? Right? If you read the First Amendment, which they cited in all these cases, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And I agree with that. We don't want a national church in the United States. We don't want an established religion in this country. Our cousins in England have had one for a long time, and if that works for them, great. We didn't like the idea of that when we wrote the First Amendment. A lot of the states had established churches, and eventually those kind of gave way to really religious liberty. But what we're seeing here is brazen defiance of previous Supreme Court rulings, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's time for the states to say, you never had the authority to ban the Bible. You never had the authority to ban the 10 Commandments. And if we're going to have a government school system educating children, what could be more important than teaching them about God and his laws? So I'm encouraged by this. And by the way, Alabama just passed the same bill through the House last week. The state of Oklahoma passed last year that all schools have to teach Bible to the children. Bible's got to be in all the schools, and I had an opportunity to interview Superintendent Ryan Walters, the state superintendent of public schools there. We disagree on a few things, and that's okay. He's a good guy, and he thinks children cannot have a real education without knowing about the Bible, and I agree. So kudos to Oklahoma, and we're seeing a lot more of that, Tony. So no matter how hard the evildoers try to de-Christianize our country, no matter how hard they try to brainwash our children to either reject or forget the Lord, the pushback is there, and I'm very grateful that Americans are making their views heard through their elected representatives.
Yeah, well, that's good. Those are some good moves, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just going back to the gold thing, I mean, the price of gold is, I think, maybe hit another high again today. It's going up, and silver's kind of fluttering around a little bit, but eventually I believe that it will also make new highs. But we heard a few weeks ago that Musk and Trump were talking about going to and inspecting the gold in Fort Knox. Have you heard anything more about that? Because it seems to have gone silent, which I think may be a little suspicious that we're not hearing anything more about an audit there. Do you know anything on that?
Yeah, that is very suspicious, and I don't have any special information on that. I know what everybody else knows, but I also know that Donald Trump has been touting gold for a long time. If you go back to his 2016 campaign, he talked about how great it would be to go back to a gold standard. He actually leased out a huge section of one of his office buildings and took payment in gold, and it was a big news story. And he said, "Hey, what they're doing to our dollar is unconscionable. Gold is a secure store of value." So Trump has in the past expressed a lot of support for gold. When an opening came up on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, he nominated a gold bug for that position, Judy Sheldon. And so I think we're coming very rapidly, Tony, to a fork in the road. I think we're on the verge of an economic crisis of historic proportions. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I don't know what will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. There are lots of candidates for that. And so what happens then is people are going to be looking for radical solutions. Okay, the last system failed. We need a new system. What do we do? And this fork in the road that's coming up, I believe probably in the not too distant future, we've got two options. Either we move back in the direction that works, right? All throughout the scripture, gold and silver are the only things mentioned as real money.
Yep.
And that's been tested for thousands of years, and it's worked very good. The other alternative, and I've been writing about this at the New American since right out of college. 2009, I think I did a cover story on the global currency that these evildoers were working on. They wanted to turn the IMF into a one world central bank. They wanted to turn the special drawing rights into a one world currency. And they were very open about it, even at the time. And so that's the fork in the road we find ourselves at. So I think we're coming to this fork in the road. And I think it's hard to know which way we will go. I think it's possible that we'll go the wrong way and end up moving very rapidly toward either regional or even global style digital currency, either run by the IMF or run by some of these emerging regional central banks. But it's also possible that between Donald Trump and some of his economic advisors, and there are several, by the way, who've spoken very publicly about the desirability of gold, the desirability of abolishing the Internal Revenue Service. And so I think that's a possibility as well. And I think Trump understands this better than almost anybody knows. So I'm encouraged by the possibility that we could move in the right direction, but I think just being prudent, we should also prepare ourselves for the possibility that moves in the wrong direction and respond accordingly.
Well, I kind of have a thought that it might combine the two. Actually, that's what I've always thought, because we see other central banks too, accumulating gold, and Russia and China and places like that, and plenty of others as well, building up their gold reserves, and you have the whole BRICS currency thing and all that. So I'm thinking what's going to end up happening is that gold and silver and other things will probably end up being some sort of backing for the new digital currency system, rather than it being completely based on nothing. Like people go, it's just zeros and ones, you don't need anything. I don't think that's the way it's going to go. Personally, I think there will be some backing for their new system that they introduce. So I'm not surprised if gold actually becomes a part of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there have been discussions about the possibility of trying to do kind of different types of backing. And Zimbabwe is actually pioneering this right now, right? They hyperinflated the currency to the point where I literally have hundreds of trillions of Zimbabwe dollars and they're not worth anything. True story. And so they've actually pioneered down there right now this idea of the ZIG, where they're doing partial gold backing for the currency. And I think that's a very real possibility. If people lose all faith in the financial system and the monetary system, they might have to have at least some tenuous connection to gold so that people will have their confidence restored. But I think there's a very real chance that it moves in a bad direction. I was talking to a very interesting individual, Aaron Day, who really understands the digital currency aspect pretty well. And he was saying we are already living under a CBDC style currency program. People just don't realize it. And what's emerging now, we've got bills in the House and in the Senate, the Stable Act and the Genius Act, that would basically create a CBDC in all but name, right? So it'd be kind of a CBDC not run by the central bank, but run by the private sector, but with all the same concerns that we have about the CBDC. Total control, total surveillance. And as he pointed out, money is already programmable. Right. They, for example, the food stamps that they give people in America, you get a little debit card. You can't use it for soda. You can't use it for candy. You can't use it for socks, but you can use it for fruits or whatever. So these kinds of things already exist. They already have almost total knowledge of what your finances look like. And, it's just a small step away from a total disaster when it comes to freedom, privacy, sovereignty, et cetera.
Okay, yes. All right. So have you got any other things? Well, we still got maybe a little wee bit of time. Have you got anything else to talk on?
Well, I would encourage people to be in prayer. I would really encourage people to be in the Word of God. There are some great things happening, and we mentioned some of them here today. Just yesterday was Resurrection Sunday. I would encourage people to read the president's proclamation for that, President Trump's proclamation for that. It was very, very encouraging to see that the White House is acknowledging Jesus Christ as Lord. We may not necessarily agree with every policy that comes out of there, but I think it's very, very important for a nation to have leaders that acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord, acknowledge the resurrection. And so we're in a really interesting time. The church has a historic opportunity to advance here. I just got back from India, Tony, and saw what God is doing there. It's absolutely incredible. India is listed as one of the worst countries in the world for persecution of Christians, and yet the church is growing and the church is advancing and they're discipling children. And so, we kind of get fixated into the news cycle and we lose sight of the fact that God is sovereign. The gates of hell will never prevail against the church. God is still doing incredible things in the midst of this darkness that we see growing around us. And in a very real sense, I think we ought to be encouraged, because if our hope is in the Lord and not in the news cycle, not in the politics, not in the politicians, how could we possibly not be encouraged? So I would encourage people just to be in the Word of God, be in prayer, follow God's instructions about praying for your leaders, whether you live in New Zealand, whether you live in the United States, whether you live in Mexico. Doesn't matter if you like them, doesn't matter if you agree with them. Pray for them as we are commanded to do. And what's happening in education, always critical. And people always want to find these grandiose solutions. We got to pass this law, we got to do this thing or the other. Let's just start in our own homes with our families and our children, and in our local communities with our church. And God is faithful, and he can do incredible things through people who are faithful as well. As
you're saying that, I'm thinking about China. People in China won't be listening to this program because they won't be allowed to.
Right. That's right.
And, they're really clamping down on Christians in China. It must be really a difficult place to be a Christian right now, as it seems to be another wave of that, communist fist coming down on Christians in China. So I suppose we should be praying for our Christian brothers and sisters in China.
Absolutely. And all over the world. I mean, Pakistan, right? It's a really tough place to be a Christian right now. Saudi Arabia, all over the world. And for all of church history, Christians have been ruthlessly persecuted. And I think we in the Anglo-Saxon world, we in the Western world have kind of lost sight of that. We've gotten so comfortable.
Yeah.
But Jesus warned us, right? All those that will live righteously in Christ Jesus shall be persecuted. So we should be praying for our persecuted brothers and sisters. Whenever one member of the body is suffering, we should all suffer with them. But we must also be encouraging them, and we must recognize that we've got a lot to do in terms of God's instructions for us. And I would just encourage people to figure out where God needs you in this battle, really where he wants you, because he doesn't need any of us. But what has he called you to do? Is that to be a light in your workplace? Is that to properly disciple your children? Is that to run for elected office? Is that to expose people running for elected office? I mean, God's got a big program. Each of us can be a little tiny piece of it. And so we should pray that he would use us as his instruments for his glory and for his purposes. And now is an incredible time to be alive. And I know there's some really bad stuff happening in the world, and we should be in prayer about that, but we should also be thankful that God chose this time in this place to put us. Obviously, he's got something for us to do, and really appreciate all that you're doing, Tony. So thank you for having me on.
And thank you, Alex. That was a really awesome discussion. Lots of food for thought in there, and I really appreciate you having come on and spent the time with me today.
It's always a pleasure, always a blessing. I appreciate so much all your work, Tony, and look forward to having you back in the United States very soon.
Yep, and great. Hopefully we can catch up again soon too.
Absolutely.
And folks, remember to subscribe to us at aminutetomidnight.com. And you can do that down the right-hand side of our webpage where it says subscribe to blog. And we do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. I appreciate the people that donate. Look, if anyone else is able to help at the moment donating with my trip ahead and everything and some expenses still to cover, it would be much appreciated. And I won't say any more about that except thank you to the folks that do donate. And if you can help out, it's always appreciated. You can do that at our website, aminutetomidnight.com. And the music used I've written, played and recorded. So God bless, and God willing, we will be back with more shows in the near future.